Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Zhen Way podcast. I'm your host Zhen Way, where I will be talking everything about life, career, and tech. I have been spending my last decade in my career in health tech, consulting, and also in banking as well. And right now, I'm taking a career break, so I'm trying to kind of discover fascinating insights and trying to build this podcast in the open. So today, for this special episode, I have my colleague, my ex-colleague, I should say, and also a dear friend, and she's also studied psychology in the past, and obviously we end up being colleagues in tech, right? So I want to find out what happened. You shared with me a lot of stories in the past around like how you started wanting to study psychology, but I wanted to see what parts of those stories that we can share today. I wanted to also maybe ask her about studying in Scotland as well, because Scotland is not a very popular destination for studying, right? So I want to see how is it like studying over there, right? So now, why not we start off by maybe introducing yourself a little bit in terms of how you start your career and how's it going so far, right?
Thanks, Zen, for having me. Yes, hi everyone, I'm Nabilah. So I started my career about like 6 years ago. So I started studying psychology, and then I moved to management consulting, focusing on innovation consulting. And then I joined Zen in a digital mental health tech startup. I was supposed to be looking at product, but I kind of did everything with Zen when we first started out, then eventually looked into more product management role. And yeah, now here I am, looking into venturing more product management specific roles, but that could change depending on what my heart tells me eventually.
Yeah, I think it's been quite popular. I think one of our friends were telling us that she's been observing that people around her has been taking a career break and rediscovering what they wanted to do after doing several years of something, right? So I guess you're probably in a similar space as well.
Yes,
right?
I'm one of those. Definitely. Yes.
So I wanted to kind of start off with I guess how you started to be curious about psychology in the first place, right? Does it have to do with I guess your friends, your school, your family? Tell us a little bit about that.
So to be honest, when I first graduated from school, so high school in Malaysia, like SPM, so we have like, and when we were 17, and I remember for the first time in my life, coming out of school, I was given the options to decide what pre-U do you want to do, what matriculation do you want to do, where do you want to go, and everything. And all of a sudden, within like weeks, I was expected to decide where my career was going to be. And that moment, I was like, I've never had to decide anything for my education. So like a bit of background, in my schooling days, I didn't have tracks to choose from. I was like, you had to do science, like 100%.
Oh, okay, right.
And
was that the expectation from your family or?
No, the school.
The school.
I literally,
Even better, the society have decided for you.
I didn't have to do, all I need to do is just attend the classes and do the exams.
Okay.
And it was set at 9 subjects for the high school bit, and I never had to decide any bit of my education in any shape or form. And then one day after graduation, I was expected to decide the subjects, decide which country I'm going to, decide which degree I was going to, and yeah, it was overwhelming. And to be honest, from my family perspective, everyone was health background, so that's all I knew.
Right.
So I was like, okay, never mind, I'll pick the safe route, go something sciencey. And then when it was time to decide which degree I wanted to do, I was still overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. And I felt like, oh my God, like if I decide now, will that change the whole course of my life? Will I regret? There were so many thoughts in my mind because I never decided anything for education. And then I died back. I was like, you know what? Think about what I want to learn. Let's not think about career. Let's not think about prospect. Think about things that I genuinely wanted to be curious about and wanted to learn about. So that was psychology. So growing up, I'm a bit different from my siblings and my family members. I'm a bit of a rebel, I'd say. So I have different thinking, different from my siblings. So in terms of belief, perspectives, thoughts, and everything. So I kind of observed this while growing up, and I realized that I was so different. And I realized, like, is it just me? Or is everyone like that? And I was so interested with the whole individual differences, and I think that was the reason why I was like, you know what? I'm curious. I'm genuinely curious about psychology, and I wanted to learn about it. So to be honest, I didn't think through. I was like, psychology was something I wanted to learn. For the first time in so long, for education, I can decide what I wanted to learn, so psychology was it.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. And you've mentioned that your family are all, health backgrounds.
Yeah.
So were they expecting you're going to be a psychiatrist, which is technically a doctor, so therefore still living up the Asian stereotype as, yeah, she's going to be a doctor, just a different type of doctor, or was it like a
So,
a different kind of conversation there?
Actually, I didn't have any conversation. My parents were like, okay, so it's either be a doctor or a dentist. And I was like, I don't want either. Because I've seen my siblings, and it's a commitment because, once you study, it's not easy. It's 5 years, and you have to do specialization afterwards and stuff like that. And I know my siblings, they love their job and they love the industry. But to me, I was a confused little lamb. And like, to be dedicating myself for that point of time, I realized it was too much of a commitment. And I realized that, do something I love. And yeah, so I had to present my case to my parents why I wanted to do psychology. So I practiced my pitching skills at that point. And starting them young, I would say they did treat me well, but yeah, they had it's as if I'm pitching for money, which is true also, they were funding my education.
Yeah, I'm paying for my fees. You gotta have a strong case for this.
So I had to build my case. Yeah. So that was it actually. Yeah.
Right. Do you remember what was your, I don't know, because it's a pitch, right? What was your punchline? It's like, therefore, this is the right choice.
So they were not convinced at all. The
so
questions,
you bombed it.
I bombed it.
Right.
My parents were like, what's the prospects? I think my parents were very, very concerned because she said they were, doctors, accountants, engineers, the professionals are confirmed a job. I mean, from their lens of life. Right. And they were like, you be a doctor, no matter what, no one can replace you. I agree. I mean, now, we see tech helping decision making in the healthcare industry. Yeah. But for me, they wanted to make sure that I was fine. And psychology, and then me coming into the pitch, obviously not doing well, I was like, oh, you never know what's going to happen afterwards. Clearly not acing it. And but they were okay. I think I kind of made it very clear that like I don't want to limit myself with things I don't want to do. And I don't want to look back and waste your money 5-6 years, depending if I have to resit and whatnot. I don't want to burden them that way. And yeah, so they were like, okay, you do this, I'm giving you the money. If you fail or you not fail, it's on you. You better sell it and you better achieve and whatever. And they wanted to be a clinical psychologist at the end. Because they were so obsessed over the word DR.
Right.
And then I was like, okay. I just took what I could get. And after graduating, I was like, nah. I realized that we were exposed to a lot. We were exposed to forensic psychology, organizational psych, a lot of things. And I did internship in organizational psych. I also did internship in clinical psych. I realized that clinical psych wasn't my way. Right. And I realized that when I graduated, my parents were so excited. They were like, oh, so do clinical psych. And I was like, okay. So I was in Scotland. So in Scotland, you had to do research years. So either you do your own papers or be research assistants. So 1 year I took to just do research in hopes to be a clinical psychologist. And while I was doing all that, I realized I was so confined. I felt like I was the hamster. I was the rat, the lab rat. I felt like my impact was just bounded by the four walls of the lab. And that was when it hit me, like, I don't want to do psychology anymore. I don't want to do clinical psychology. Solely psychology. Right. And yeah, so that's when I took the pivots. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, but what was it like studying in Scotland, right? Did you did some I don't know, some pre-U subjects over here, or you just went straight to Scotland? What was it like over there?
So I did A-levels for 18 months here in KL in Malaysia, and then I flew there. So in Scotland, slightly different. So I wasn't studying purely psychology. I did chemistry and biology as well. It was fun. It's quite cool. Their structure is that by the time you're second, third year, you actually have the option to change to the other subjects. So if, let's say, you decide psychology is in the way, you can go to chemistry or biology, regardless to which direction you want to go. So it was quite fun. It was great that they allowed us to have that, options to kind of look through and study what you like. So that was really nice. And they were very open in terms of, like, if you're not sure, it's okay, let's try this out. There was so many modules to choose from. Wow. But yeah, I actually really enjoyed studying there. Yeah.
Right. And in terms of choosing Scotland, was that an intentional choice, or you applied various places and that's the place that kind of like gave you a space, right?
So for psychology that year, so 2012, 2013, psychology was one of the top unis. It was Glasgow. So that's why I applied for Glasgow. So yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's pretty much
Was
it.
there someone that said that were you choosing it because it's too fancy? It's like some exotic location or
Actually, at first I didn't want to go like central London because I felt like I wanted to be somewhere where I could be like really out, out in the overseas, because I feel like London was very Malaysianized with a very European country.
So
There's
like
a lot of Malaysian students there,
Got
and
it.
a lot of families go travel there as well. It's a very nice country and city. But I think Scotland itself, not a lot wants to go there because it's like in the middle of nowhere. It's cold, it's gloomy.
So you want to force yourself to really learn the culture over there.
Yeah, and be on my own, so that you don't succumb back to that comfort zone of you being back to the same
Just
culture
hanging back with Malaysians.
with the
and-
Malaysians. Yeah. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I've studied locally, right? But after hearing various people when they study overseas, that's what tends to happen. Which there's nothing wrong with that, right? But
Yeah.
it's just your comfort zone and it's comfortable. Like you said, it's always like gloomy over there, and you find a lot of comfort with familiarity.
Yeah.
So kudos to you for choosing a place to just want to really just try something new and be kind of like independent and learning all that, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of like become that moment where you realize that, hey, I'm confined into these four walls and just in a lab being a clinical psychologist is kind of not your thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you did organizational psychology as well and all that. Were you more inclined to do those kind of things at that point of time, or?
Yeah, so I think at that point, from my lens, psychology could be one way or another. It could be bringing those who need help to, be daily functioning, and another group that is actually unleashing their potential. So I think organizational psych experience that I had with one of a firm in Malaysia was that like I was in the HR team, and I think it was really looking at unleashing their potential and growing them and whatnot. I think that spoke to me more than general clinical psych. So
Right.
yeah.
So when you picked so I guess that brings us to like, okay, you kind of know that, okay, the field of psychology, you can still bring some value into your next job, even though you're not going to pursue your into becoming a mental health professional. Tell us a little bit about your first job, right? How did you pick your first job, or did the job pick you? That life picked you. You didn't pick the job, and tell us a little bit about that.
So yeah, I got back from Scotland because I kind of miss my parents. So I was like, okay. So I got back, and then I was back to square one. I didn't want to do psychology, and that was all I knew for the past 3 years. And then I was like, okay, I want to bring impact. And I was like, I had puzzle pieces in my brain. I was like, I don't know where to start. And my parents are all from the health background, and they were like, who told you to do psychology? And then I'm like, okay, so I'm on my own.
So they didn't say like, you know what, just go and do your master's at least.
They didn't force me, thank
Right,
God.
wow.
I think they were kind of putting me on my own, which also I appreciated. They were like, you decide what you want. We honestly don't know either. So they were like, you do whatever you want. So I think where I started off, because at that time, management trainee programs were huge. I think you were in the first few batches, but by the time I graduated, it was like every firm had like a management trainee program.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, obviously peer pressure. And I was like, maybe like I should go one of those if people like it, right? But I think when I got back, I think it was a very odd timing. So it wasn't like a opening or interview stage. So I was like, okay, so I researched a bit what management training programs were like, and they were like, okay, so the general basis is basically understanding how organizations work, looking rotations and understanding industries and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I pondered on consulting, and I was like, how bad can it be? So then I applied because I was like, I was still intimidated. I felt like in psychology, for me, I felt like I wasn't technical enough. I didn't have any, I guess, professional background.
Because you don't know business. We never studied accounting.
No.
Even for I don't know, like we don't know marketing.
Exactly. It was like literally, psychology taught me, I guess, appreciating perspectives, and there's
Reasoning,
never outcome. There's never 1+1, but it's always like
It depends.
it could be 2. So I actually appreciated that, but I did feel a bit insecure about where do I go next, right? Because I didn't have the skill.
Right.
So then I applied for this boutique innovation consulting firm, and they were very kind enough to take me in. And I was very, very lucky because they were. When I think the first week, I told them what my concerns were because I wasn't sure about business. I didn't even know how to talk to people. I had a very huge imposter syndrome with like not being able. I mean, you're expected to know the industry the moment you walk into a client meeting, and I was very like anxious. Not sure if I know enough and everything. And thankfully, they guided me very well in terms of like what's expected, how you can do. They gave me so many resources, books. They put me into programs, which was very helpful. And I think it really boosted a bit of my confidence here and there. So yeah, that's how I found my first job. And it did its job, honestly. I was exposed to so much. I understood how businesses work, my communication skills. That's where I think I learned most from. From project management and stuff like that. Although it wasn't as structured than I hoped it was. But honestly, it was unstructured and it was the best.
Wow.
I mean, you kind of like learn on the go.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I wouldn't have known because like I knew you when we were in Thoughtful, right? And your communication skills, that was the last thing that was of a concern. I mean, like you've always communicated with a lot of confidence and all that, right? At least from the outside in perspective, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting how to hear that that years kind of like shaped who you are.
Yeah, it did.
It being a boutique consulting firm, did you look for them or you just Googled like consulting firms and their name kind of popped up?
I Googled and it popped up. So I was looking, so there were a lot of different types of consulting firms, right? And I was looking primarily in innovation or something new. So that's why they popped up. So they're focusing on innovation consulting. Why I looked at innovation was like my obsession over driving impact, right? And I was like, okay, I want to do something new, something people have never heard of. So I thought, okay, innovation consulting, like that kind of spoke to me at that point of time. And yeah, that's why I found them. Yeah.
Right. And what I appreciated about having worked with you for several years was you being able to kind of understand and work with like technical team members as well. Was it a curiosity that you also had in your younger days, or was it the innovation firm that helped you to kind of gain those skills and knowledge around those areas, right? Because you are able to work with engineers to be able to kind of worked out the different specifications and requirements into something that is actually workable, right?
Yeah.
I'm so curious about what are some of your key learnings when it comes to tech and also I guess other areas when you were with the innovation firm.
The innovation consulting firm really pushed me to the tech side. So I never would have imagined myself like 6-7 years ago upon graduation. I would have never thought I would be a PM ever. So what happened in the consulting firm, because we were quite small. So the consulting firm had their own innovation management software. So it's like a little SaaS that they were doing. And I was dragged into the software team to just like help out testing, and just make sure things are okay, launches here, there. And then eventually I find it quite exciting. I was like, oh, okay. So eventually I started embedding myself more. So I was actually not forced to. I kind of just be there, put my hands there. Yeah. And then like literally when they have stuff going on, I'm like, I want in, like I want to be more involved. And I think that time of my life, I was really curious. Like I literally was so open to anything, like even for consulting firm, for the consulting projects, even for like, if it's for a different industry that I've never heard of, some company that I've never knew it existed, like I'm like, I want in, I just want to know what's happening and everything, because I was just really eager to learn. And I think with the software team, when that happened, I was like, ooh, a whole new world. And that's when I realized, like, how to speak to engineers, how to speak to designers. And it was actually a gradual learning, honestly. But back then, it was like maybe 60-40 or 70-80. So 70% being consulting and maybe 30% being software work. So that's when I realized the more I did software and the more I did consulting, I realized that software spoke to me more.
Right.
And I just wanted to focus more on that from a career perspective rather than the consulting aspect of that job. Yeah.
Yeah. For those who are not very familiar with the consulting world, right? The common stereotypes are after spending 6 years there, the common stereotypes are they do pretty slides. They say things that we already know. They don't know as much as we think they are. And all that kind of stuff, right? So how much of it how much of it did you experience, right? In terms of like, how much of PowerPoints you needed to do before you kind of like, this is like, software is pretty much interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember the last consulting project I did
Yeah.
was an entrepreneurship framework for the Ministry of Education. It was really fun. So I was speaking to a lot of government bodies, a lot of universities in Malaysia, and amazing stuff. And then I realized that was your power of actually executing it, your power of actually bringing and delivering impact from all your beautiful plans, all your beautiful slides was limited. And I felt that was it. Once you've done your job and you pass it to the person in charge, you don't know when it's going to be executed. You don't know whether it worked well.
Right.
You don't know whether you can improve it further because you don't have the results from the first round. And I think that was when I realized I think consulting may not be for me for now at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, after a few years after spending a few years in consulting, I felt like the biggest impact that you can have as a consultant, regardless of what kind of project you're there, most of the time the clients hired they kind of have their answers in their head. They have a few hypotheses that in their head. So it could be that they don't have the resources or the firepower to execute it or to think about it. Or it could be something that is quite risky that they're not sure, right? And I think the best way to approach it is really to kind of ensure that you've done your homework and to be able to understand. There's a lot of stakeholder management, I feel.
So much.
Right?
Yeah.
Being able to really work out a way that they can accept. Because at the end of the day, if you propose something that is too drastic, in my opinion, that it is going to be a uphill battle trying to kind of get buy-in so that it can be executed, like what you mentioned, right?
Agree. Yeah.
And I think the other learning that I kind of had is that it's really related to this Harvard article that is talking about how consultants on the job, right? They're constantly facing the anxiety of looking stupid in front of their clients.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they are pushed into areas that they may be new or they're just inexperienced as compared to the clients who's been in the industry for 20-30 years, right? But at the same time, they need to learn really fast, right? And they need to be able to kind of project that kind of confidence as well. It's not that they're a scam artist or whatever, but they are paid for thinking skills. They're paid for problem-solving skills, right? Would you agree on that?
I agree. And I think one challenge that I had back then was that I came out of uni and I was fresh. I am learning on the go in the business and your industry and your company. And I think projecting that amount of confidence really took I was not comfortable with it at all because it was like you telling someone, like you said, 20, 30 years in their job, not even in the industry, they've been doing that for so long, and you come in and you tell them that, hey, this is not efficient, we're going to try this another way, and tell me how whether this works. And you're like nobody who just came out of uni. But yeah, I mean, that's the value of consulting, to be honest, because it's a fresh new perspective. I mean, it can be annoying for people, but honestly, it's good to get as much perspective and input from wherever you can. So I think that's where consulting comes in.
Right. Do you remember the most interesting client conversation that you had? Probably the most challenging one, or maybe the most uplifting one. Whichever you pick, right? Just to share kind of what's it like a day in the life of an innovation consultant.
Oh God, yeah. So there was a company. This is not really positive, but I think dressing up. For me as a woman, to look more professional, to look more seasoned, to look more capable, we had to put on, I guess, better, more serious looking clothes, or put on your makeup and so on, which honestly didn't really mind me. I didn't really think it was difficult or annoying, but when I came into the room, it was a bunch of people maybe 50s and 60-year-olds, and they were maybe double or triple my age. And I came in and we were brainstorming, so it was actually a session to kind of and I was the facilitator. And I was my job there was to get you guys thinking in a process, in a structured manner, and then we can look into solutioning. And I remember the first time I sat into the room and they were like, no, you tell me what to do. They were so resistant. And I remember there was the oldest guy in the room, I think he was the one who has been working for 20, 30 years in the company. And he was like, you're the consultant, right? You tell me lah. You've been working, the company in and out, okay, you tell me. And it was very intimidating. I remember my heart pounding out of my chest. But then I guess that's where the confidence come in.
Right.
That you're just the way you talk, how to squeeze, you turn around, roundabout here, there.
You remember what you said? Like,
yes.
yeah.
I do not remember what I said. It was so, I remember I was just rapping it out. I was like, yeah, correct. I'm here to guide you, and we're in this together. We're partners. I don't know as much as you. Like, I was basically putting myself down, but also putting myself up, like saying like how credible I am to match with them, but basically also giving them like you're amazing,
the honor, the respect that
yes.
they want, right?
I'm just here to help you, that kind of positioning.
Okay.
And
so the meeting ended okay.
Ended okay.
Wow.
It ended well. So I think after the solution stuff came out, and I was like, it's all you. I'm just here. That's what my role is, just to make sure you unleash your potential. I think it's a lot of like fanning their own ego that I had to do. That's like, everything is you, which is true. I'm just there to help you out. So until today, actually, that guy, I think now he has another respect level up for me. So now he respects me, I guess. But it's a lot of confidence that has to come from within that I didn't know existed.
I remember I had a similar story. We need to take a survey on this, right? How many consultants out there has been fed the same lines like, you're the consultant, you tell me, right?
Yeah.
I had a similar story where like it was a very senior guy as well. I remember I went there, right? I was very junior into my job as well, and then I was being tasked to bring a junior consultant with me. So two junior consultants, one more junior than the other, decided to go and approach a senior stakeholder and to validate certain things. You know how you came out with something, you still gotta ask them questions like, hey, what do you think about this? Would this work? Would that work? Right? So we went into a room, and then the guy was like, same thing, right? It's like, hey, you're the consultant, right? Why are you asking me questions? You should do your homework and tell me, right? Why are you asking questions? Because in all due respect, we pay you a lot of money. I said, then he said, not you, but your company.
Yeah.
So you should be doing all the thinking for us, right? Then I similar to you, I do not know what I said.
I cannot.
I do not know what I said. All I remember was that we tried to end it on a good note and stuff like that. And I think he tried as much as possible to be respectful as well. Yeah. And then after that, we ended the conversation. Went back and cried to our
Oh my
senior.
god!
I mean, not literally, but it was like, oh my god, that was terrible and stuff like that. So after that, what happened was talking about dressing up and all that, right, man? Yeah. So my senior went in. So she went in with her blazer and all, with a little bit of a thicker makeup or whatever. Went in. And man, his tone changed, okay? Like, I'm like, oh my god, I must be looking like an intern back then or whatever. Again, no respect. Yeah. So his tone changed, and I'm like, I'm literally saying the same thing. But the tone changed and stuff like that. So like, wow, it's not easy, man, being in those kind of situations.
It's not. Unfortunately, appearance played a big role. I remember I literally went for shopping for clothes that made me older and like try to put on a hairstyle that was a bit more like, so that people trust you. Right. Which I can't blame. That's just how people work because like, if somebody's going to advise you, enough, right? Why not? Yeah. So it didn't really bother me. But it's actually underrated that people remember what we talk about.
So I mean, like, okay, then what? You did that for a few years. Yeah. And then come to basically coming to into your latest role as well, right? And what was the kind of like the thought process coming into this particular role, right? And again, another common trait in consulting is that we all experience some form of burnout.
Yes.
It's like starter kit for consultants, right?
Yes.
Put burnout in there, right? So it's just so unfortunate. So like, what made you pick the role with thoughtful, right? Yeah.
Okay, so before the burnouts happened, so I think apart from being put into software teams and exposure to product development and stuff like that, another project that was heavily leading was startup mindset programs that we were doing with corporates. So basically we would have these startups come and do some sessions and sharing and some seminars with like corporates. So looking at more adopting the mindset, adopting the resilience and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I would sit in all these sessions and I would hear about all these startups doing their thing, and it's from all different industries. It could be real estate, it could be sustainability and stuff like that. And I would sit there in my chair and I would think to myself like, wow, these people, I mean, the company is not big, they only have 5-6 people or 10 people, but they're like literally in changing lives of like at least 10 people in this world, 20, 30 or maybe hundreds, and like changing how the whole landscape of how things usually run. And I remember sitting there and I'm like, damn, I would really like to have my own startup one day if I find something or be in one. Like, I think I remember that thought kind of just stayed with me for a long time. And then burnout things happened. I think there was a time that was like, I think the senior you got when consulting, so the more projects, the more like roles and responsibilities came to you. And I think the burnout things kind of crawled upon you.
Right.
And I think more and more, I felt like I questioned every work I did, every impact. Well, what was the outcome of it? I think internally, I just felt so confused.
Right.
I felt like everything I do, it was great. I saw the outcome. I saw the things, and you see everyone was like, yeah, this is a great idea. This is good, blah, blah, blah. But I think that was just up to that point. And then there's also exposure to the impact startups that I'm like, Then I realized, I think it's time to make a change and go to a startup. But then at that point, I knew like startup is not easy, no matter what stage you join. And it's like, it has to be something at least that you're passionate in, or else there's no point of you putting all your blood, sweat, and tears. And I think while I was in consulting, I met the company that we were at, the CEO during an event. And I remember I was like, whoa, this like mental health is gonna be big in like Malaysia. And when I came, Malaysia had like the word psychology makes people like, oh, so you just work with crazy people. I'm like,
that stage, right?
The stigma was so insanely huge, and people were so scared to talk about their mental health. And I think when she did an event, I volunteered because I was like, I want to be part of this, whatever it may be. And so then I think a few years later, I was going through my own, like, I guess, career crisis, I don't know what that is. And then I was like, you know what? I think if I want to join a startup now, I want to bring impact, and it should be something. And then I looked up Thoughtful.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, oh my God, you guys are so big. I mean, the last time I saw you guys was like 2 years ago, 1 year ago.
Yeah.
And you guys are hiring, so I'm like, okay. So that's how I applied, and that's when I talked to you, Zen, during an interview. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that you reminded me that I wasn't even fully on the job yet. Right?
Yeah, you were just about to enter like 2-3 weeks, and then you were interviewing me already. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to kind of like tap into this whole like curiosity, right? Around I think maybe around behind the thought process around like just being curious about these things, right?
Yeah.
Where do you think your sense of curiosity come from? Because what I realized as you're talking around into psychology and into software and stuff like that, it all began because of curiosity. Where do you think your curiosity came from?
Ooh. Where?
What was your first, I guess, memory of you being curious about something, I suppose?
I think, okay, so this is just me, myself. Nothing to do with my siblings, nothing to do with my family. Disclaimer there. But I think growing up, being in an Asian traditional family, we have our rules, right? Oh, don't do this, don't do that. Yeah. And I think that made me realize, like, why I cannot? What happens if I actually do it? Am I going to get scolded? That's it. Like, I start to like, and I think your brain kind of like, the naughtier you get, the more you think about like, what's the repercussion?
Right.
What's the next steps? What's the worst that can happen? And what could be the other side, that could potentially happen? And I remember like, there was one time, I really, my parents were like, oh, you shouldn't eat this because it's not good. Because I'm from a Muslim family, so we couldn't eat drink alcohol or eat pork. And I'm like, okay, yeah, fine. But I think I went to religious classes, and I think when you were really young, they just tell you like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And I remember I'm like, what happens? Like, okay, cool, got it.
Yeah.
But like, why?
Yeah.
Like you start questioning. So these rules that was imposed on me in terms of different facets of life, that made me question like, why cannot? But obviously I found my reasons for the religious aspect. I found out my reasons later on.
Alright.
But I think that just everything after that, I think I was just very naughty also lah. But everything they said like, oh, cannot do this, cannot do that. And my parents also, I guess they picked the safe route. They're just like, you know what? I'm not gonna explain. I'm too tired maybe. So they're just like, don't do this, don't do that. And I think eventually I was just like, I started questioning everything and curious.
I'm very curious. I'm very grateful for the curiosity, because obviously that has allowed you to did what you did in the past, right? In terms of your career aspect. So I think it's suffice to say, like in early stage startup you're right to say like we kind of did everything, and it's definitely not easy. And you need different kind of skill sets for sure. How do you think, like now looking back, right? How do you think your skill set has expanded and evolved?
Yeah. To be honest, like I think when consulting happened, or uni actually, or my high school experiences and stuff like that, you know, those things seem so insignificant while you're doing them. You're like, oh, it's just another day. And I think when you went in thoughtful at that point of time, I realized there were so many things that is accumulation of the skills that you have done that actually build what you can actually deliver in the startup.
Can you give an example?
So communication.
Right.
So back then, I think you were involved with my first pitch.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that.
So I had to do a pitch to a client, and it was so funny. I was really scared, and Zhen was coaching me so kindly, so patiently. Oh my god! And so in school, I did debates. And also public speaking, and then in consulting, I even did like a consulting project, like a program on how to pitch. You know, telling people how to pitch. I never even pitched my whole life. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh damn, like the world really revolves, huh? Like it's now my turn to freaking pitch. And when that point of time, when I was tasked that, I was very nervous, even though I had experience speaking to people, so it was not like a weird thing. I even taught people how to pitch, and then now it's my turn to pitch. Like, why can't I just basically do what I preach, you know?
Right.
And it was like, I think it was an accumulation of like, you know, that you telling yourself about like you've actually done everything you could, and you basically just take it all in and then deliver, right? And I think it was a lot of self conversation with myself, like basically like you can do this, you cannot do this and stuff like that. It was a lot of like perfectionist in me and so on and so forth, and yeah, it was insane. Anyway, but basically the communication bit aspect, I think it was I realized that, like, you know, the exposure I had in school, I was comfortable with speaking with people, and then pitching in consulting, then I realized I know what I'm talking about. You know, I've done the training, I've taught people how to do it. And then like later on when it happened,
you know the product.
you know that it's not that bad. Like, you know, you just basically need to talk. And yeah, I think Zhen saw how bad I was the first few rounds. I was so nervous. I could feel my fingertips sweating. I remember when I was actual pitching.
That I wouldn't know because you were remote.
You were remote?
You were remote, that I wouldn't know.
I'm so glad we were remote. I wouldn't know what to do with my hands.
Right.
Like, I remember while I was pitching, you know, I had a script and I was like, oh, pitching, trying to sound as natural as possible. And I was looking at my fingertips and I was like, oh my god, I didn't know fingertips could sweat. Like, literally, that's the first time I came into my mind. But yeah, I think that's why I realized that, like, that happened. And I think with the team communication and collaboration and stakeholder management, I didn't know all could happen at the same time. Like, you know, I think when we were in a startup, like, the communication and stakeholder management was freaking crucial. Like, one slip up can literally just mess everything up, like alignment issues and stuff like that. So I think all my life you technically do manage expectations of parents, you know, where you're going and stuff like that, of yourself, you know. And when you're in uni, you know, how you plan your time, how you talk to your lecturers. I think all of that you realize when you look back, you're like, you've actually been practicing this all your life, and everything just kind of like help you to become who you are.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the way you put it, it's pretty interesting that, I guess, startups, if you're thinking about going into it or wanting to start one, it's kind of like really a testing ground for everything that you have learned in the past.
It is.
Right.
It is like everything you've done in your life. I mean, like, it was Steve Jobs, right? He was saying that he took like one module of design, like for something, and he was like, he didn't even know what was the purpose, and then look at him now, and you know, back then with Apple.
I remember he was just really obsessed with calligraphy, and that's why he was obsessed with
exactly. Yeah. So it's like those small things that I would I was thrown into projects I didn't even like, but I realized I learned so many things from it that I shouldn't have been so like in my own mind and like, oh my god, I hate this job, I hate this, I hate that. I think it's more focusing on things that, like, whatever you gain from anything you do can actually contribute you to the next project or the next work or the next job or whatever you want to do. So yeah.
I think maybe the follow-up question to that is that, is there something that you didn't expect to be useful at all, but it came like, hey, I didn't know that this could be useful, but thank God I was kind of exposed to it, right?
So, oh yeah, I think one of the projects we did, I think we had like activation programs that we spoke to users and stuff like that. So there was a time of my life that I really wanted to be a VJ. I don't know why, it was so cool, you know, having mics and just talking to yourself. And so we had a couple of sessions speaking to participants and users. We were doing it remotely.
Yeah.
I was feeling myself, and I was so comfortable. I remember at that point, I think I already pitched, so I guess I got the comfort already. And I realized like it was so much fun, and I really enjoyed myself. And I don't think I would have gotten that confidence or that level of comfort if I didn't have to go through everything that I've gone through with all the speaking publicly and whatnot. So yeah, it was kind of funny.
I mean, I always welcome a co-host if you want to be a co-host.
I can, yeah, of course.
I mean, you know, like we've built I think the wonderful thing about, you know, what we did at Thoughtful was that we it's safe to say that we've actually have seen a lot of you know, users coming to tell us stories about how, you know, the platform has helped them, and it's always very heartwarming and a good reminder in terms of like why we did what we did.
Yeah.
Do you remember there was a memorable experience or a story that kind of made you felt very grateful for, you know, the work that you do?
Yeah. So I think I remember. I think because like I managed the reviews, I managed the user feedback, so I monitor this every week. And there was one time, so we were doing a newspaper, like a publication feature. So we were supposed to look for users who can be a testimony and story to be interviewed and whatnot. So I was looking through the database, and I was like, okay, so this user and that user, blah, blah, blah. And I found this user. I was like, okay, you know, seems from statistics perspective that I felt that this user might be suitable for this kind of testimony. So I spoke to her, and I think before I spoke to her, I didn't know what to expect. And I think back then our whole team mission, you know, is always about like, oh, we want to bring mental health accessibility, you know, so that they don't have to step out of their own home to talk about their mental health. And we were always like, oh no, safe space. I mean, it was ingrained in our head, but we've never really seen or heard anyone actually say that our mission has been achieved.
Right.
And so this user, before we actually go and pass her to publication, so I had a chat with her before we, you know, to see whether her story was okay. Yeah. So she was saying that literally she was iterating the mission that we had in mind. She was saying that like without me preempting, okay, there was no bias. Yeah. Right. She was saying that like, you know, she was so shy, she would never talk about mental health ever to anyone, and the fact that she had it in her phone, she really literally can engage with her mental health anytime, anywhere. I was like, are you reading off our website? I'm like, oh my God. And like, she was saying that like, you know, she really doesn't have to go anywhere and people can't trace her. Like she's at a psychology center. She can be in her own home. She can be basically texting anyone, but she's texting her psychologist. And that stuck to me a long time. Then I realized that, you know, it could be just me debugging one day, but it's basically changing people's lives, like basically them engaging and making them feel more fit in a more mental health perspective, right? So yeah, I remember her until today.
Yeah. I mean, like that definitely sounds like I think it's a testimony in terms of the product kind of like sold itself in that sense that you can just get your user to articulate back in terms of what you intend to achieve without telling them or feeding them in any words, right? Yeah, I think I mean in the early stages, you know, user feedback is so important. That's why, you know, we tend to really go like, you know, quite specific. And we obviously heard good and bad as well. Since we're building it, right? In terms of being a product manager, that's kind of like part of the role, right? Being able to kind of build that user experience, being able to understand what they want, and of course trying to balance it with business direction as well, because at the end of the day, you know, we're still building a business. We have to survive in order for us to be able to achieve the impact that we want. So as a kind of like a product manager that's trying to kind of learn the ropes around product management and things like that, right? You know, what do you think are some of the key things that you've kind of learned that it is important if you want to kind of, you know, embark on this kind of roles, right?
Oh, okay. So I think a bit of background first. For product management, I think in Asia, is still quite young compared to, or less mature compared to like US and so on. So traditionally, PM roles would be people who graduate with computer science or software engineering.
Makes sense.
Whatnot, and then eventually they venture to PM. But in Malaysia now, generally anyone can kind of become a PM. So to me, I'm very lucky for where I came from, and I'm glad that how things came out for my own path. I wouldn't say that it will work out for everyone, but I think for me personally, it just worked out in my favor. But then now there is a different kind of PM. There's two types of PM generally. There's technical PM and there's also business PMs. So as the word kind of like means, is basically technical, you focus more on the, I guess, how of a product, how it works. And I guess from a business one, more on the why of why you want to do a product. So I think there are two different ways. I think if you come from computer science or you're coming from data science or engineering, you can go from a technical product manager. If you come from business or marketing or whatever it may be, you can still become a business product manager. But I think what helped me the most when I was transitioning into product management, even from consulting to the software and even from consulting to Thoughtful, was focusing more on the transferable skills. So, look into the things that stakeholder management, alignment, and really like how you communicate to one person to another, not trying to sugarcoat things, but also saying what it is, but also trying to jaga hati, trying to make sure that they are feeling okay. So it's not it's all about how you communicate to people without actually making other feel less than or more than. Second is really understanding what is needed from a product manager kind of role. So look into what sort of skills they generally would have. So basically like, okay, be able to do user research or stakeholder management, and kind of like look into your own job scope of whether you are able to accommodate to kind of those kind of skills. Last but not least, definitely user empathy. So I think really there's also structures and frameworks on how to actually do user research and interviews, but you always do anything first in mind is actually your users. And this one doesn't have to be a PM, then only you have to speak to users. It could be you going to a meeting. Let's say I'm going to be going a call with you, right, Zhen?
Right.
And I'm like, okay, I know how Zhen's like. Maybe Zhen has expectations. Maybe Zhen has certain needs that he wants to accomplish. And me knowing those, coming in and really clarifying those, that's technically me understanding you and being empathetic to you. So those kind of things that you kind of need to harness, and I think it's fine once you have those kind of skills that eventually you can actually venture into product management. Right.
You did a lot of the user research work. I still remember that you were basically comparing different kind of experiences, even if it's not related to the specific industry that they were in. And a lot of your work is also trying to kind of map out that user journey, right? Do you think those skills are, as they are trying to venture into this role, they're trying to do a career pivot in that sense, do they have to, do some Google certification in product management or whatever it is, right? Because stakeholder management and all that are super important. Right? Are there some like foundational stuff that you need to make sure that you kind of get the lingo first, right?
So I think what I did was before I joined Thoughtful, I actually joined some LinkedIn Learning and also some Udemy courses on like introduction to product management.
Right.
So I think what's key is that at least you know what a product lifecycle is like. What sort of documents are required, and what sort of things are structure with, right? Sprints and how it's structured. Right. Those kind of things generally you need to know how communication styles are needed and how you actually, what's your day-to-day job, what's expected of you. So those kind of things definitely important. But I think another aspect, apart from knowing your users and knowing what your day-to-day job is, I think it's also to look into research. So this doesn't just limit to users. It could be like the landscape research about what's happening in industry. Or it could happen like from technological trends, anything that's happening now. So for example, ChatGPT, how would that actually impact your business and so on? So it could be anything, but basically you have to be up to date in this kind of stuff and see how that impacts you. It may not, but if it does, how would it actually benefit you or not benefit you? So it's always that kind of thinking that kind of have to have at the back of your mind to kind of see where it comes in.
I'm talking about sprints, right? Because in managing a kind of like technical software product, right? They generally run in so-called sprints, which are a finite amount of time. So
Yeah.
generally speaking, 3 to 4 weeks, or sometimes 1 to 2 weeks, for example, depending on the company and the context.
Yeah.
And to kind of deliver a certain, for the lack of a better word, like features, buttons, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And essentially during those sprints, you have different teams, right? So you have product managers like yourself, you have your software engineers usually involved, and then you also sometimes also have like the stakeholder involved as well,
Yeah.
right? And then we spoke about talking to these different teams and getting them together is
Yeah.
probably one of the key things that the product manager have to do.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about? We say as though like these are like not a different a human that speaks a different language. You get what I mean? When we say like we need to learn how to speak to these different kinds of stakeholders, right?
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit in terms of like what do you mean by that, right? Learning how to speak with these different teams, right?
Yeah. So imagine, if I were to laymanize it, so imagine you have a group of like, your one parent with you, and you have a kid, a baby, you have a toddler, you have a teenager,
Right.
and you have a newlywed, whatever it may be.
Okay.
So you have a group of people
Yeah.
who are from different backgrounds,
Okay.
different expertise,
Yeah.
and different understanding of things. But one great thing about like generally product management as a whole, everyone knows what their role is.
Yeah.
It's just basically their understanding and the impact of what they need is different. So I think what I meant was basically knowing what every team needs to know, what sort of language style they like,
Right.
what they require, what are their, I want to say backlogs, I guess the things that they push back on, or things that are more concerned on. Because we're all humans at the end of the day, right? We all have our preferences. We all have our, things we just ticks us off or triggers. I think as product managers, you are, as much as you're doing other things, the main thing I would say is actually how you manage people. You should know what designers like to say or what would be their concern. What engineers, in terms of feasibility, for example, you have to be there and be able to address it before you even suggest the idea for other data analysts or different stuff. So you basically have to map that all out, understanding from each stakeholder on how this will impact them, and kind of laymanize it and also communicate them in a language that they understand.
Right.
It's just basically speaking like to another group of people that you've never spoken to. So you're the translator in
Right.
that way or another lah.
And was there a situation where they kind of push back on, I don't know, like the usual trope that we see out there when it comes to product management and
Yeah.
software engineers is like, we promise something to be delivered within a single day.
Yeah.
And they say like, hey, that takes a month, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have no technical background and I have a very imaginative mind. So it's a very bad combination. So usually I would, I have this idea in mind. We discuss with other product team members and we're like, sounds feasible. Obviously in my mind, but not looking on the technical side, whether it is feasible in a specific duration of time.
Right.
So I think as PMs, you should be fluid. And what I mean is that it's not saying that you should be so amiable. I'm saying that more of the fact that if you have an idea in mind, especially for me who don't have a technical background and don't really know how the feasibility aspect of things, especially when it comes to new things, right? And I think where I come in is basically like, okay, this is an idea I have. And what do you guys think about it? So make them part of the discussion. Make them be involved in how things are being run. And I think where I come in usually, which was very helpful, was that I have a different perspective of things. Like, let's say this is difficult. I'm like, oh, okay, then try a different one. Like, and these people are like, oh, we never really thought about that. So I think as a PM, don't limit yourself in terms of like, okay, I want to do this done and I need it to be done by X amount of time. It's a collaborative effort. And I think that's where you come in to make sure the collaboration happens. Communication's been okay. And then it should be fine, usually. Yeah, usually. But yeah.
Right. And it sounds like at the end of the day, yes, it's a collaborative aspect, but there are situations where you have to make decisions, and being a part of a startup, you have to make a lot of decisions, and sometimes time just doesn't wait for you.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as waiting for clearance.
Yeah.
Waiting for clearance, all the way for weeks and months on.
Yes.
And that's uncomfortable. I've
is.
learned that
It's very
quite the hard way in terms of like, you know, being able to kind of maintain a confidence while you make
I-
certain decisions that you've never made before and
Yeah.
you've never tried before, right? And so for you, in terms of how do you kind of like maintain your confidence when you're trying to really just try different things and you know you're about to make that decision, right? So how
Yep.
do you maintain that kind of like confidence for yourself?
So I think I was there. I mean, I was there from we started, right?
Yeah.
So I basically knew how things progressed, how sort of things, features, buttons, designs, and so on. So I knew the product in and out. I can confidently say that even up to today.
Right.
And when these things happen, and you know, we're expected to give a decision like
Yeah.
in the moment of time because we have to launch next week or whatever, it has to be in the next couple of days. I think even our engineering team sometimes might not be on top of things, and that's normal. It's expected for product managers to
There's so
know
many
what's
screens
happening.
and so
There's
many
so many
tasks,
things,
right?
exactly. So I think for me, whenever those kind of things happen, especially urgent matters or things that is like a derivative of a feature that we've already done, that's my call. Basically, I need to sit down and see what we have, map out every option that we potentially can embark on, and just take the fastest route out or whatever needs to be expected done. So I think number one is definitely know your product inside out.
Yeah.
And
Spend
like,
time doing that.
spend a lot of time doing that.
Yeah.
And that's the only way you can find, I guess, for us at that point of time, we were
Yeah.
looking more on, I guess, quick fixes and also lower hanging fruits that
Yeah,
bring the
for
most
sure.
impact. So I think at that point, we need to, I guess, maximize what we have currently, but also elevate that to become something of a different kind. So you can't do those things if you don't know what we have.
Yeah.
You will eventually end up building or doubling your effort in terms of if you don't actually need it because you already have it.
Right.
So
It's kind of like
Yeah.
cooking, right? Like in terms of like
yeah,
you gotta know your ingredients.
Exactly.
How does onion smell like? You know,
Exactly.
If it's burnt, how long before it burns?
yeah, and you need to know why it's important.
Yeah.
Like if let's say a textural element is important,
Yeah.
then you don't have cashew nut, for example. Then what can you replace it with? Something else with a structure.
Yeah.
But you look into things that has a similar characteristic, right? Or else
Yeah.
it just doesn't really serve its purpose to begin with.
Yeah.
So,
I,
yeah.
what I found fun when you know when I was still involved
Yeah.
in product in
Yeah.
product management together with you in the beginning was
Yeah.
really figure out a way to make things work within the confines that we have. Right? It's let's say like for example, hey, we need to deliver a certain feature that we have never built before, but we
Yeah.
kind of need it to work to a certain extent for
Yeah.
a certain timeline. Then how do we make it work, right? How do we test it out so that before we invest further effort into it,
Yeah.
and you know further invest engineering and time into this to kind of just test it out.
Yeah.
I find that really fun because like you know you're just really trying to find ways to test things out within like within weeks or within days as
Yeah.
well, right? So I find that being able to kind of work within a constraint is kind of fun and interesting.
It
Because
is,
if you tell me like give you a blank sheet of paper, right? Sometimes I don't even know where to begin. But if you can
Yeah.
give me certain parameters and
Yeah.
constraints, that tends to be more fun because you're trying to squeeze out the max
Yeah.
out of the current constraints that you have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that for me was pretty fun.
It's pretty fun. I think one challenge I have for sure, I think there's something like, I think it's not as said as often from all the product podcasts or product courses, was that when you do A/B testing, so A/B testing is basically you see which version or which option
Yeah.
does better.
Facebook does that to me all the time.
All
You know
the
how I
time.
know? Like my wife's version of Instagram and mine, totally different buttons.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
really?
yeah, yeah. I can literally see it in front of me. It's like, hey, where do you find that button? So how come mine don't have that button? So clearly, my wife and I has been set into
Segmented,
group A and
yeah.
group B to test the different
Yeah,
buttons
yeah,
and
yeah,
layouts
yeah.
out.
So those things, I think I think once the product kind of grows, I think one underrated challenge was that when you do new features entirely, A/B testing, right? So the thing is, you'd want to have minimal effort. You don't want to dedicate months in terms of like development, but you want to make sure that it's good enough.
Yeah.
You know, so that you can really test out whether it
Yeah.
actually works or not. But the thing is, like, I remember there was a dilemma that I discussed with our team members. That I was like, oh my god, like, this feature's not doing great. We did A/B testing. So does it mean not great? Or is it because we didn't develop it enough? You know, is this too MVP? Is this...
Yeah, you're gonna go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole. And I was like, oh my god, should we develop it further? Like, even though it's doing bad, does it
Is
mean
that MVP not MVP? man?
maybe we should make it a bit better? So I think that's one of the judgment calls that I
Right.
think as a PM you should make.
Yeah.
To know that like these kind of things is very gut feeling. You do have to work with the resources you have at hand.
Right.
But if you believe in certain things, don't get so attached on any idea you have. But if you want to test it out, make sure you control as many variables as you can. But even if you cannot and you still believe it can somehow work, take it as a pinch of salt. Do some user interviews and figure a way to kind of test it. I guess question your own hypothesis in your own mind.
Here comes the data people. What about the insights? What about the metrics? You know,
Exactly.
what is this gut feel thing coming on, right?
Exactly. So get numbers to justify those gut feeling. So I think one thing for as a PM, I mean, I constantly hear this across different conferences that I've been to, is that PM's worst enemy is their own bias. You know, even when we interview users, we're like, do you like this or you don't like this?
Sure. Like, that's exactly what I want to hear. Great
Okay,
idea,
thank you for the
point,
day.
Right?
Literally.
I'm going to tell this to my boss. See?
I told you this will work. Yeah, legit. So I think, and this is the psychology bit comes in, right? You would have never really, I mean, that helps for me because I know what bias comes from, how it stems from, and you kind of be more aware about how you convey messages or how you talk or how you think. And so, in a way, I'm doing like 10% psychology now with PM.
Oh, that just triggered me, my thinking around this philosophy around like product management, right?
Yeah.
Like there are those people who are like diehard Steve Jobs, where they say like, you know what, we're not gonna follow what the users say because the users don't know what they want, and they want to create their own like thing, right? It's like, you know, this is the best way that they can have it. Yeah. And then obviously the other camp is like, you know, we need to make sure that the users, you know, this is what the user want, right? Sometimes they, So what do you think about that? What's your stance on that?
Ooh, I believe there is, okay, let's say for me, my approach. So when we were working together back then, I looked at it as a 2-track pathway. So should never limit into one, you know, thinking forever. So I think what we did back then was we looked into more user-led, and we also looked into more, I guess, innovation-led, based on like different trends and, you know, different competitors, they do this and stuff like that. So once we look into that 2 threads, then you only can see the difference whether we actually should listen to the users or not. Because I think at that point of time when we were, in the company, we cannot say which way works best because we don't even know what we don't know. So I feel that like for us, that would, you know, you should always venture out. To me, you should never choose one way or another unless you're sure. If you're Steve Jobs and you have the balls for it, go for it, man. But I don't.
So once the moment you choose already, you gotta like triple down until you succeed. Otherwise, you don't change your mind.
Triple down and succeed. But I think, to me, before you go down that hole, make sure you've done your research on different things. Because if, let's say, your users are doing something right, it's also different features, right? If it's something so innovative, something that doesn't even exist in your competitors or the other landscape, then I guess it's worth trying to figure it out. But if it's something like a button, no need lah, go so crazy, right? Maybe users are saying something right, you know? So balance out in terms of which features and so on. But I do feel that taking one high road to just focus on what you want to do, eventually I feel that it might have an issue with product market fit eventually, if let's say, sort of education problem and stuff like that. But I feel like you should never choose one strategy or the other. I feel like it should be a balance of both.
So it just sounds like, you know, you gotta be aware of different things, be willing to try different things.
Yes.
And talking about like being aware of like, you know, trends, competitors and stuff like that, right? I think one of the important thing is really to be updated. Right? And you gotta learn constantly. What are some kind of like resources that you have used in the past to be able to you know, keep yourself updated on this kind of stuff, right?
So we were in the mental health industry and healthcare. So we basically, I would subscribe to Mobi Health News, which is basically like a publication website that does healthcare news, coming out investors and trends and so on. So I would do subscriptions with that. So every weekly they would send like a newsletter, and then they would. I also subscribe to Google Alerts. So you can actually subscribe to certain keywords and they can send to you on your email. So those are 2 main things. So every Monday morning, I would actually sit down and just look through these trends. And I think every time you look into any news or any trends, it could be on a different company or it could has nothing to do with your industry at all. Is look into like, does this impact me? That's number 1. Number 2, if this does or it doesn't, how will it impact me? Just think about that. And if let's say you were to bring this to Thoughtful or that company that you're working on now, how would that actually change in terms of work or life? If it doesn't, it's okay. That's fine. It's just more of for you to practice that kind of thinking for every article you read, So basically, you practice that kind of like critical thinking, I guess, in terms of seeing whether things or trends can actually come in.
Right.
So yeah, this is my mission. Yeah.
No, I think the past couple of years there's been quite a lot of movement, and we've seen the boom of funding and investment, and then obviously we saw the winter of investment as well. Stressful times, right? How do you kind of find that balance for yourself as well, right? Working in a highly demanding job as well, right?
You mean as a person?
Yeah, as a
my
person.
own balance. So I think when we first started, we were a 5-person team for at least about a year. I don't remember much of that year.
It's like every person counts, right? 2020 and 2022, it's kind of like everything rolled into like
it
one
was
blur.
it was a blur. I mean, the pandemic aside, like even working. I mean, when people ask me what I did have a sheet of like the stuff I did. But also like, that all really felt like was rolled into one. So I think back then, I mean, even now, we also vouch for that work-life balance and really try to make sure that you are, I guess, self-love and self-care in some way or form. And I think for me, personally, I would always make time for a bit more things that I love. So I really like working out. And so I would at least, I wake up earlier in the morning or I sleep later at night to basically squeeze that in to just make me feel a bit more uplifted in shape or form. So I think a lot of like more intentional movement kind of like slotting in here and there where I could.
I'm trying to kind of find that balance, right? Obviously with your help as well. Trying to kind of find that intentional physical outlet, right? Trying to kind of like read more around this, and I realized that I think physical movement, I've lost a lot of it simply because perhaps it's an excuse, but I just like to play team sports in general. It's hard as heck when you are so busy, and timing is an issue.
Timing,
Right? So I'm trying to kind of find different way to reframe those exercises that I don't like, to kind of just put that balance back, right? And I'm glad. I really envy people such as yourself that is able to find joy and purpose in like the gymming and the high intensity kind of workout. I'm trying to kind of find that for myself as well. And as kind of like the last few questions, right, in terms of like were there some of the if you can think of a kind of like an aha moment that you had in your career so far, and you needed to kind of pass this on to someone, it's kind of like your last advice to someone. It's like, what are some of the things that you want to tell them, right? It's like, hey, this will be helpful.
I think you said this one, to always be curious and just look at things, and the attitude you have and the mindset you have is that you should always be willing to learn. And it's not about being humble or being an expert in matter of things. It's basically like it's appreciating every perspective and always trying to expand in every way or form that you could. So I think if I were to look back, I mean, maybe 5-10 years on my own personal life, even some advice I would give myself is, number one, don't stop being curious. Just read up anything, you know, and don't limit yourself. Number two is just gather as much perspectives as you can and network as much as you can. So I think obviously for PMs, one thing I realized, so I think you knew back in May, was it May this year, I went to a product conference, and I remember it was great, going to a group of people who felt the same way that I did, all the struggles as a PM that we went through, where we all could resonate with one another.
Kind of like, me too,
like, yay, we're on this together. Right. But what I realized was that PM was one of the jobs that we realized that it's not I guess we cannot really compare apple to apple to one another. So we have a person on a speaker be like, oh, guys, we should do ABC, and you're like, we do ABC, but the thing is, it's very hard, and that's what I remember. This was one speaker, he said you should speak to your users every week, and I'm like, ideally. But I'm like, it takes a lot of preparation to speak to users, and it takes a lot of post speaking to the users and really documenting on what next to do next and everything,
because it's what you do with it after that, right?
It's a lot of work, and like, and we're a lean team then, and I was like, trying to take these learnings and realize that like everyone has their own approach to things. We have our fundamental, I guess, like things that we need to do as a PM, as a product manager, but it's really like how you interpret it based on the resources you have at hand, based on what the objectives in terms of business direction you have. Like, it's so subjective.
Right.
You have to take it in terms of, like, you really need to contextualize it and see how it is.
So listen, but apply with discernment.
Yes. So don't like take it at a face value kind of thing. So back to your question was, if I were to advise anyone, it's just two things. It's more of the attitude you have. One is just keep being curious. Never stop. I don't think this one should ever stop until the way you die, I think. And second is always be open to trying new things. I think one thing that I'm very grateful for was that I think in consulting back then, I used to envy my colleagues who felt that like, oh, consulting was the way to go. I'm like, how are you so certain on things that you want to be, You just started working for like 3 years. And then when I obviously I was so open-minded in terms of learning new things, and I wouldn't have actually pondered upon product management if I wasn't so open. So to me, always be open to trying new things and just be curious forever, because you never know what life might lead you, what things you might like, what things you don't like. It's more of a self-exploration that I'm really vouching for. So, and it applies to career and also personal development. Yeah.
Yes, let's end on a fun one, right? This may sound a bit weird, but is there a particular failure, your favorite failure, let's call it, right? Because of the, obviously the valuable lessons that it taught you, or perhaps it's just very amusing that, now that you look back, right? Is there like a favorite failure of yours? Because it's kind of related to product management, right? We talk about failure day, right? Or messed up day.
Yeah.
It's a thing where, you just showcase how badly you messed up and everybody laugh about it, right? And learn from it, right? So was there like a kind of like a favorite failure of yours?
Favorite failure. Okay, so this one's not related to the two things I mentioned just now. So I think as PMs, your attention to detail has to be like top notch. Like, you do not have any discount to say that you messed up or you missed out a detail. Like, you should be the person that goes through everything. And this one, Do
I?
I feel like...
Tell me.
So the payout matters that we had, I think, in 2 years ago.
Right.
So we were giving a service. We pay our mental health professionals for the services they have given. So I think what happened was that we changed in terms of how we pay and the rates that we were paying, and I misunderstood. and while I was processing, and Zhen was being an angel, he trusted me. He didn't question me, but obviously my thinking was slightly different. I didn't clarify. I just gave that we underpaid. We eventually then compensated accordingly. But I told you this was the amount, and you're like, yeah, okay, cool. So we, do the necessary things. And then we found out later on that we underpaid. And obviously a lot of people were unhappy, including myself. Okay, I was also unhappy with my own performance. But I think that really like got to me, that I'm like, okay, you have as much as how busy you are, whatever you do, don't just slack off because you just have a lot of things on your plate. Like, put as much attention to detail as much as you can. And like, when you're looking at anything you do, speaking into a call or having a conversation or a quick huddle on Slack, like, put your all to it. Don't be present, and be like, make sure you have everything you need to know. If you're reviewing a document, make sure you look through a couple of times. I think that lesson, although like it affected me personally, I don't need to have other people scolding me already. I was so disappointed in myself. I'm like, I should have been more detail oriented, and I think I was just so consumed with so many other things that I felt that like there's no excuse, like, it's your job. No matter what, it's your task. You're supposed to get it right, and you get it right. So I think, I guess it's a funny excuse now, huh? There's a funny story now, but back then it wasn't so funny.
I know, right? It
wasn't
like
so funny, but
it was impactful for sure.
Yeah, it was impactful. It transcends all across everything, not just like products. I think when projects or any conversations that I had, like, I remember every meeting I had, I'm like, I ain't leaving it to faith. No, I'm not leaving it to memory. No, I'm gonna make sure I clarify during the meeting. But that actually shaped how I thought about things. So,
right. Obviously I I knew about that incident now that you
Yeah.
reminded me, but I never knew I guess the gravitas of it, you know. Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting. But thank you so much for spending time with me. It's
No
been
worries.
fantastic being able to have this conversation. Obviously, even though we knew each other out of this, but
Yeah.
there were so many things I didn't know, and
Yeah.
I find it really fascinating to be able to learn from you today as well. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Zen.